أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبو القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, this is the second Friday night of the holy month of Ramadan, and I recommend for all of you, and including myself, to take advantage of these Friday nights. They're blessed nights where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised a tremendous amount of blessings. And there is a specific time period somewhere between about an hour or so, hour and a half or so between before Fajr till the time where Fajr starts on this night, where Allah has promised that He will answer the dua. And it's we don't know the exact moment, but it's at that somewhere in that time period. We have narrations about that. And also this early morning, the early morning time, so that would be this night before Fajr, is also the time in Qur'an where Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam sought forgiveness for his sons. So his sons had come to him, they asked him for forgiveness. He said, inshallah, he will pray for their forgiveness and he will do it at a specific time. And that was the time. So there are a lot of blessings, and especially that this is the holy month. Take advantage and ask Allah for your needs, ask Allah for forgiveness, especially for forgiveness. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu tubu ila Allahi tawbatan nasuh. Allah says in Qur'an, all those who believe, make true repentance to God and a pure repentance back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's an order that all people have to follow, regardless of their level and faith. So, I was given some recommended topics to speak about that I was told that people are interested in, so inshallah I will try to address some of them in the nights that I will be speaking. One of those topics is about Qur'an and the compilation of Qur'an and how it was compiled, what's some of the history of that, are there distortions in Qur'an, so on and so forth. So inshallah I will try to address those issues. This is a very vast topic, so trying to address all of these points in depth in 30 minutes or 40 minutes or however long I have is not possible. However, I will give a cursory overview and try to address the main points, inshallah. So the Holy Qur'an, as we know, is the revelation to our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Qur'an in its entirety was revealed in around 22 approximately years. Starting with the first revelation, which everyone is aware of, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, and then so on and so forth. So the verses of Qur'an, so let's go over it in a more general manner. The Qur'an is broken down into 114 chapters. Now, the compilation of each individual chapter is itself a matter of historical intrigue. However, the chapters themselves are generally divided into two categories. We have chapters which we call Mekkawi, which are those Mecca surahs we call them, or Madani, which we call Medina surahs. And the reason for that is that generally the bulk of the verses of those chapters were revealed either in Mecca or either in Medina. It's not always the case that all of the verses of a chapter were revealed within the same time period. So usually when we break up the difference between Meccawi and Madani, it's based on the time period of the life of Rasulullah. So the beginning of the time period of the prophethood, the open prophethood of Prophet. So the Holy Prophet declared the prophethood in Mecca, and he spent several years in Mecca before making the Hijrah. And so the period that he spent in Mecca, we call the surahs, which the majority of the verses came down when he was in Mecca, Meccawi verses, and the ones where the majority of the verses came down in Medina, they're known as Madani verses. And oftentimes you can generally tell which ones are which based on the content of the chapters, based on the content of the verses. For example, the verses which are Meccawi tend to deal with idol worshippers and issues of basic theological nature. One God, heaven, hell, and the rebuking of idol worship, and so on and so forth. Revealing of the stories of old prophets, depending on which prophets they were. It's also interesting as well, because the Arabs were aware of one of the reasons why certain people are mentioned in the Qur'an is because those stories and those prophets were well known to Arabs. They were not something foreign to Arabs, so they were brought forward for them for that nature. So oftentimes where the verses are essentially rebuking people or pushing them towards monotheism, they tend to be Meccawi verses. Madani verses, for example, have legalistic issues a lot of times. And you can see from there that, for example, a mushrik person doesn't care about Islamic legal laws, whereas the people of Medina who are Muslim would care. Now, there is some discussion as to when and how exactly all the verses of Qur'an came down. So Qur'an itself says, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ فِي لَيْلَةِ الْقَدْرِ, and also in another verse, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ فِي لَيْلَةِ الْمُبَارَكَةِ. So one is from Surah Al-Qadr and the other one from Surah Al-Dukhan. So the discussion generally is that, okay, is it that the entirety of the Qur'an came down in that blessed night? Mubarak means blessed, or Qadr, which means the night of decree, or is it that the Prophet was reviewing the Qur'an on that night? So some say that, okay, the Prophet received all of the Qur'an on that night, and then at certain points revealed varying verses of that, of what he knew, depending on the situation. And the verse would come and it would be revealed to the people based on the situation it was. The other view being that, no, the verses came down situationally, and then the Prophet reviewed these verses with Jibreel every year at the night of Qadr. So these are two opinions given, and it's not really a very serious problem whether one takes one opinion or the other. Now, when verses were revealed, so the people of Arabia were largely illiterate, and the Prophet was not schooled. So the general Sunni perspective is that the Prophet did not know how to read and write, and there are some Shia scholars who assert that as well, that the Prophet was incapable of reading and writing. But the majority Shia opinion is that he was able to read and write. What that means is that when the verses were revealed and they were told to the people, the most common method in which they were safeguarded was memorization. That does not mean that verses were not written down, though, either. There were some people who were capable of literacy, and they did write down verses of Qur'an. And those were stored. Now, the manner in which we have the Qur'an today, the ordering of the verses and the ordering of the chapters. So, as we said, these verses were revealed in varying situations, and the manner in which they were revealed, or the chronological way in which they were revealed, is not the chronological way in which they are transcribed in the Qur'an. Meaning that it doesn't start with Surah Al-Fatiha and then end with Surah Al-Nas, right? This is not how it occurred. the transcribing of Qur'an goes back to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. So the Qur'an in a book form, according to most of the historians, did not exist in this compiled form at the time of life of Prophet. That the chapters and the verses were known to the people. So the people were reciting verses and reciting surahs as they were. So there's a misconception sometimes that, oh no, that people kind of just put this order together themselves. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Because if you look at the history, and if you look at the varying narrations and what we understand of what was taking place at that time, the people themselves were reciting these surahs in various prayers and in various situations. So they were reciting the chapters as they were. The first mushaf, as far as we know, the first actual copy of Qur'an was put together by Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. And as Amir al-Mu'mineen himself mentioned, he said this was a task that was given to him by the Holy Prophet himself. And at death of the Holy Prophet, Amir al-Mu'mineen made a vow that he would not leave his home until that this Qur'an was compiled and transcribed properly. Now, so the mushaf that we have today, it is the same. There is some misconception that we Shia believe that this Qur'an that we have today is incomplete, or that it is out of order, or other things of that nature. Now, where does this misconception come from, and how do we address it? First, the overwhelming majority of all Shia scholars assert very affirmatively that this Qur'an as it is, every chapter, every verse, it is the same Qur'an that was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that there is not missing from it, nor there is addition to it. So where does this issue come from? There exist a number of narrations which talk about distortion, tahrif of Qur'an. And we have to understand how these narrations are to be understood, and where the ulama, where the scholars of narration and Qur'an stand on these issues. So we have a number of narrations which mention that, for example, the way that this verse came down, it should have been like this. It was really like this, and people are reciting like this. Or things of that nature, that there was this in Qur'an, but the people took it out. So first, if these narrations are taken at a face value, then no ulama takes them at a face value. No scholar, no serious scholar takes them at a face value. That, for example, the verse was really like this, X, Y, Z, and the people recite it as Z, Y, X. Okay. From that, in a literal perspective, no scholar accepts that. No Shia scholar accepts that. The understanding is that either A, these narrations are weak, and many of them are weak narrations, although there are some strong narrations as well. Many of them are weak narrations or fabricated narrations. And then as for the ones which are strong, if you read them, you will see that it's not to be taken literal. They are, as ulama have explained, it's about the meaning of the verses. That people would take a verse, and we see that today. This is happening even today. This is not something that is out of ordinary. We see that people will take a verse of Qur'an and they say, no, it means this. And use it to justify whatever it is that they wish to justify. And we believe that, of course, for sure, 100%, that there was this type of tahrif in the meaning of Qur'an. That people would take a verse and it was revealed for a particular situation, or it was revealed for a particular person, and then they say, no, it's revealed for this person, or revealed for this situation. Yes, that exists. There's no denying that. But in terms of the Qur'an being altered in the actual words, no. No Shia scholar believes that. Now, have there been any Shia scholars that asserted this? Yes. There have been one major scholar in Shia history that had this opinion. Aside from this one major scholar, there is no other that I know of that had this opinion. And even this person had changed their opinion. So this individual, some of you are familiar with Mafatih al-Jinan, which is the book of du'as by Shaykh Abbas Qummi. So Shaykh Abbas Qummi lived about 90 years ago, 100 years ago. He had a teacher who was very famous, and his name was Noori Tabrisi, Shaykh Noori Tabrisi, Allama Noori Tabrisi. And Allama Noori Tabrisi was a very big scholar at his time, and he was a muhaddith, he was an expert in hadith. And he wrote a book where he believed in these narrations. And he believed in that. He said that he believed that the full and complete Qur'an is with Imam Mahdi, Ajallahu Ta'ala Farajuh Sharif. But he said that the Qur'an that we have is enough for us, but the Imam will bring what has been taken out from it. Now he later himself changed this opinion. After he had religion, had this opinion, he changed this opinion. But he is a unique example with this opinion. Other than that, we do not have such an opinion amongst any of the major scholars. Now, what's interesting is that these narrations do not only exist within Shia books. They exist, in fact, in much larger number in Sunni books. And so if you are to take a look at some of the works of Ahl Sunnah, you will see that there is actually a large number of such narrations. Some of which allude to meaning being changed, and some of which allude to verses having been in Qur'an before not being in Qur'an anymore. And even in major works, in Sahih Muslim and Bukhari. That, for example, there was a verse of stoning, rajam, which is stoning the adulterer, that they said was in Qur'an, and then it was not in Qur'an anymore. It was taken out, and people lost it and forgot about it. So on and so forth. So there are a large number of these narrations, actually more so in the works of Ahl Sunnah than there are in Shia works. However, we always assert that Muslims, Sunni and Shia, do not believe that Qur'an was altered. So that even the people from Ahl Sunnah who accept such narrations, they accept it in the same way that we're looking at it, meaning-wise. Or they have varying other explanations for it. Now, as far as Qur'an itself, what are some other aspects of Qur'an that are interesting to note and to understand? And to understand also that there is some confusion in some things in Qur'an. What are some types of, we said there are some distortions within Qur'an, or of Qur'an, that have to be understood properly. Now, as far as we said, words were not taken out of Qur'an. However, meaning, we said meaning was changed. Now, what are some other things that have changed, or that can change, that people have played with? The way that the Qur'an is recited is another one that oftentimes can be manipulated and used to alter meaning of Qur'an. And this is something that has taken place, and we see that quite often. For example, if you look in varying printings of Qur'an, there are places where you have to stop while you're reciting. Or they claim that this is like, stop here in the middle of the verse and then continue. So it's a waqf, like stop and then you go. And so there are rules of recitation of Qur'an. Now, these rules, where did they come from? Many of these rules are valid. Some of them are not something that are not based on specific grammar rules. They're interpretive rules. And there are examples. For example, in Surah Al-Imran, the 3rd verse of Surah Al-Imran, in many of the printings of Qur'an, there is a pause where it says the verse says, only Allah has knowledge of the ta'wil of Qur'an. And it says pause. And then it says, and those who have strong knowledge, they say the knowledge is with God. So they put a pause there, meaning that only God knows the true interpretation of Qur'an, and others do not. Whereas the Shia perspective is no, the pause comes later. That, okay, God and those who have strong knowledge, meaning prophets and Ahl Bayt, understand deep meaning of Qur'an, and others say so on and so forth. So there are these types of things that are there, and they have been put in place by people. In terms of grammar and how Qur'an is recited, again, the huruf and the harakat, not the huruf, the harakat. So the grammatical markings, and also some of the other. So like for example, when you have the dhamma or kasra, these were added later to Qur'an, and they were therefore and those are usually fine. I mean, they're based on grammatical rules, but prior to their placement, it caused what we call distortion in Qur'an, tahrif in Qur'an in the way of its recitation, which then changes its meaning. And I'll give the example here. One of the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen, his name was Abu Aswad al-Dulayli. So he is widely considered to be the first individual to open a school of Arabic grammar in the city of Kufa, and he was the first person to begin putting the dialectical markings in Qur'an. And he had come to the way that it happened, according to many of the historical accounts, is that he himself came to Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wassalam. He said that there are people reciting the Qur'an incorrectly, because at that time there was no harakat. So the people would add their own vowel endings based off of memory, and oftentimes they would make mistakes. So he came to Imam Ali, said people recite, for example, this verse, he mentioned this verse specifically, which is coming from Surah Al-Bara'ah, Surah At-Tawbah. He said, "Inna Allah bari'un min al-mushrikeen wa rasulihi." So it says that God is, Inna Allah bari' means Allah is free, min al-mushrikeen wa rasulihi. So He's free from the mushrikeen and their prophet. If you say wa rasulihi with a kasra, it becomes attached to mushrikeen, meaning the prophet is a mushrik. So that's, if you recite that way, that's what it means, literally. So he came to, in the correct recitations, Inna Allah bari'un min al-mushrikeen wa rasulihu. So he came to Amir al-Mu'mineen, he tells him that this is what's happening. So Imam Ali says, then come, you sit with me and I will teach you. And do as I do. And then he opened up the school. And even the term that we have for Arabic grammar, which is nahu, it comes from Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. Because nahu actually, it means a path, a way to go. So he told Abu Aswad al-Dulayli, he said, you go and you continue on this nahu. You go on this path. And so he opened up the school, and that's what they called the grammar. So that also existed, and it can still exist. Other issues that can happen. Again, in terms of recitation. So after death of Holy Prophet, because the majority of the people lack the understanding that there is an imam, they began to do many things. And we talked about this I think last week when I talked about imamat, that they started to open up varying schools of thought because they didn't know how to interpret Islamic issues. One of the other things that happened is that people would disagree upon recitation of Qur'an. They said, no, the way to recite the verse is like this. Or the other person said, no, it's like this. Now, the difference in recitation was very slight, but there was difference. And so, what has happened now, amongst the Ahl Sunnah, they claim that there are 7 recitations of Qur'an. That the Qur'an is generally recited in 7 different ways. Each way slightly, very slightly different than the other. And so they say that there is a hadith from Prophet, which we don't believe that. We don't believe in this narration. But their interpretation or their explanation is that there is a hadith coming from the companions claiming to come from Prophet, that the Qur'an had come in 7 different ways of recitation. According to our narrations, there is only one. It only came in one correct way. However, the people asked varying imams about this, imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. They said it's okay, recite the way that the people recite, it's fine. It's not a problem. But we have in some of our ziyarat that the very, very correct actual recitation of Qur'an, Imam knows that. And Imam is the only one who knows the real and correct recitation of Qur'an. So this is like some of the aspects of Qur'an. Now again, the Qur'an that we have, absolutely, it is sufficient, and absolutely 100% it is complete. And the issues that happen, as I said, in terms of like this, sometimes grammatical issues, recitation issues, are very, very slight and minute in nature. And they're not changing the words of Qur'an. What they intend to do with some of these things is change some of the meaning of Qur'an. However, alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, because of the work of many various scholars and also the use of common sense, oftentimes one can very easily see when such things are taking place. Now, the other aspect to this topic, so there was like this, speaking about, you know, the nature of Qur'an itself and the revelation. The other secondary part of it was, what's the benefit of studying Qur'an? How can one study Qur'an? Do they need to study it in Arabic? And inshallah, I will address those points quickly. So, first, the main thing about Qur'an is that people have to understand its meaning and apply it to the best of their ability. Sadly, one time I was looking on an internet forum, and these people were having a discussion. It was an Islamic forum, and I mean, it's so ridiculous to me. But somebody actually even asked this question. They said, "What is more beneficial, understanding Qur'an or memorizing Qur'an?" And I was very, very surprised that many people were answering memorizing Qur'an. More beneficial than understanding Qur'an. And then they would come and they would say, look, we have some narrations. I found some narrations which talk about the benefit of memorization of Qur'an, but I couldn't find any narration talking about the benefit of understanding Qur'an. Very like simple-mindedness, like it's silly. It's silly. As if somebody needs to tell you that you should try to understand. What's the point of reading the Qur'an? What's the point of having Qur'an? That for example, like we need a specific narration, Prophet has to come, you should learn what this means. No. I mean, what's the point of reading it then? I mean, it's so absurd. But of course, 100%, the main thing is to understand Qur'an. How can one understand Qur'an? How can one benefit from Qur'an? First, Qur'an is open for everybody, and with sincerity, everyone will benefit from Qur'an to their level. Somebody may not know all the Arabic. Somebody may not know all the tafsir. Somebody may not know any of these things. But if their heart is clean and they go to Qur'an, they're going to benefit way more than somebody who doesn't have good intentions but knows knows Arabic language inside and out. This is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is most merciful. If you act with sincerity, what you get will be enough for you. But here's a question, what does it mean to be sincere? Sincerity is not like, okay, I'm just going to sit down, I'm going to read Qur'an, I'm not going to make any effort to learn. There has to be an effort. It's not a necessity. Not everyone is capable. Obviously, not everybody is capable, for example, of learning the Arabic language, of learning all the tafsir. That's very understandable. We all have different things in life. But if somebody makes no effort, is that sincerity? With sincere effort comes results. I'll tell you a story, a very, very beautiful and interesting story. And I heard this from Ayatollah Makaram Shirazi. So Ayatollah Makaram Shirazi, he's a marja living in Qom. I'm sure many of you have heard of him or familiar with him. He's a very well-known scholar and mufassir of Qur'an and very respected marja taqleed. And he mentions that he met an individual, and this individual is famous, and many people knew him at the time, but Sheikh Maqam Shirazi, there's a video where he's speaking about this individual, and he was living around, his name was Karbala'i Kazim, that's what they used to call him, Karbala'i Kazim. So in the Iranian society, in fact, actually in a lot of, even in other parts of the Middle East, other Shia societies, when somebody goes to Karbala as an honorific, they append the word Karbala'i to their name. So it's supposed to be an honor, a title for that person because they went to Karbala, for example. Especially in older times because journey was more difficult. So Karbala'i Kazim was a villager, and Ayatollah Makaram, I remember he mentioned that when he first met him and people told him of his special ability, inshallah I'll explain. He said, I met him, and when I first saw him, I didn't think he understood anything. He said he looked like a completely ignorant villager. Didn't know anything. Looked like couldn't, even write his name. He said, but then when I sat down and I talked with him, I realized everything the people told me was true. Karbala'i Kazim had memorized the whole Qur'an, but how he had memorized it is the incredible part. And not only he memorized it, he understood Qur'an better than most of the scholars. In fact, what Ayatollah Maqam Shirazi said, and many ulama had said before, Maraja used to go to Karbala'i Kazim to ask questions about Qur'an. So they used to bring him to Qom and sit with him and ask their questions about Qur'an with him. And the late Sayyid Ma'rashi Najafi, he sat with him and he went over the whole Qur'an with him, from cover to cover, to see. In fact, actually, because he said, I want to make sure this people have said this Qur'an might be changed. We have these hadiths, and there was that one scholar who said this, let's make sure. What happened with Karbala'i Kazim? So Karbala'i Kazim, he lived in a village, and he grew up poor and illiterate. But he was very, very sincere. Very sincere. And so one day he wanted his parents and the owner of his town to pay zakat. So at that time, it was like a feudal society, essentially, where you had somebody who was like a landlord who owned the land, and people live on the land and they work on the land. So there was there was a landowner, wealthy landowner, who owned the majority of the land in that village, and most of the people in that township, in that village, worked on that land. This is like in the 1940s or 30s or something like that. And this is something common through human history. It's a very common type of living arrangement in history. So Karbala'i Kazim, there used to be a sheikh who would come and visit their town and teach people some things about Islam. Teach them some of the rules, some of the ahkam. At that time, obviously, there's no internet. Most of the people were illiterate. So somebody has to come and teach them. So Karbala'i Kazim always wanted to go and learn and become a scholar himself and learn Quran, but his father didn't let him because he said they have to work. They were very poor. So he stayed, he worked with his father. His teacher had taught them about zakat and khums and how it has to be paid on your wealth and what the rules of it are, and went over the hadiths with them and the verses of Qur'an. And he wanted to pay. And he said, I noticed the landlord wasn't paying, my family wasn't paying, so he said, I can't live here anymore. He tried to encourage them, they wouldn't listen to him. So he said, I can't live in this town anymore because the people don't pay their wajib taxes, and this is all haram. He said, I'm sorry, I can't live here with my family or anyone. And so he left. He went to go live by himself in like the desert. For a few months, he lived on his own. So he made a very sincere gesture. He was very serious. After some time, his family came around. They came and they got him. They said, come back. You're right. Everyone now, they're paying their taxes. Come back to town. So he comes back to town. He affected them a lot. And he was a very, very religious man. Anyway, his whole life, they said he wanted to learn Qur'an, and he never had the chance. There was a small shrine in their town built on the grave of one of the children of Imam Rida. So he used to go to that shrine and he would pray there all the time. And he would do this every day. He says one day, he's like, I went there and he fell asleep. He was very tired. No one could find him. He was gone for hours. Finally, that sheikh, the same sheikh who used to visit all the time, he found him in the shrine. He wakes him up, he said, everyone's looking for you, your family's looking for you. He said, Ya sheikh, I had a vision in my dream. A very strong vision. I saw two people come to me. They had Qur'an. They told me to read. So I told them I can't read. They told me read, just read it. He said, I started to recite Qur'an with them. And now I woke up and I remember everything I recited. So the sheikh started to test him. I said, no, every verse of Qur'an. They would ask him any question about Qur'an, he would answer it for them. Sincerity. And as I said, I remember Ayatollah Maqam Shazi had mentioned he met him and sat with him and he said, it's all true. It's all true. He passed away maybe 30, 40 years ago. Point being, is that, see, learning Qur'an, it's sincerity. The person who is sincere, they will benefit from Qur'an. You don't have to worry about studying so much in depth and I have to learn this, I have to learn that. Do your best. If you're capable and those tools are available to you, then yeah, you have to use them. Some people are not capable. But with their sincerity, they can gain a lot of benefit from Qur'an. Purity of the soul, going towards Qur'an, that's where the real benefit is. Of course there's benefit in learning the Arabic, obviously. But not everybody can do that. And believe me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. We have a hadith. We have hadith from Imam Baqir. He said, if you act on what you know, then this will be enough for you. It will be sufficient for you. So whatever even small amount of knowledge you may have, however small, if you're sincere with it and you act on it, it's enough. It's more than enough. Allah will make it truly enough. Don't think that you have to have 40 years of education to grow spiritually, to benefit from Qur'an. Millions, billions of people have benefited from Qur'an throughout all of history. How many people have we seen that they weren't Muslim, they were kafir? They didn't know anything about God. They don't know a word of Arabic. They read Qur'an and it changes their whole life. And there are some other people, they have 10 PhDs in the Arabic language and they read Qur'an day and night and it does nothing but curse them. It puts them further into darkness, into hell. I mean, look at these, for example, all these people who claim to be, so-called Muslims, and they have these groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat Nusra, Jaysh al-Hur, whatever. All of them. Speaking perfect Arabic. Reciting Qur'an 10 times a day maybe. I don't know how many times they recite Qur'an. What's the benefit? They're going to hell, as my friend Ali always says, diving. They're diving right in. So don't think that this is something that will limit you.